Yai yai nai nanai, yai nai nanai, yai nai nanai nai nai nai. Hayan na 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 yan na 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 yan na 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 hay ay 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 yan na 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 ay ay yan na 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 ha na 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 na. Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. That's the nigun of return again because we've entered Elul, Chodesh Tov. Elul is a very, very powerful month of thinking about our potentiality, our unique spiritual and moral and religious potentiality of how we can actualize our uniqueness in the world, that no one can do what we can uniquely do. And it's easy to forget that. So Elul emerges to tell us you're never too young, you're never too old to do what you should do in the world. So with that, and actually very apropos in thinking about our unique potential is thinking about the potential that is laden within us, that is buried within our unconscious realm. So let's start with a poll question on that. Do you feel you're more driven by conscious choices or unconscious forces? Do you feel you are more driven personally by conscious choices or unconscious forces? Okay, very interesting. 57% feel they're mostly driven by conscious choices, and 43% feel unconscious forces. So when we talk about the unconscious, most people think we're talking about something negative. But let's start with Carl Jung. Carl Jung says, the unconscious is not just evil by nature. It is also the source of the highest good, not only dark, but also light, not only bestial, semi-human, and demonic, but superhuman, spiritual, and in the classical sense of the word, divine. So we tend to think of the unconscious as like these hidden negative forces. But Jung, in Jungian thought, talks about how there's also this light-filled side of unconsciousness. Consciousness remains one of the most profound and elusive phenomena in human experience, a puzzle that captivates thinkers, scientists, and spiritual thinkers alike for centuries. It's the single medium through which we perceive reality, construct meaning, and navigate our inner and outer worlds. Yet, its origins and mechanisms continue to defy complete explanation. Indeed, questions about the nature of conscious awareness have likely been asked for as long as there's been humans. This conversation today delves into the intricate and multi-layered terrain of both conscious and unconscious mental processes, investigating how these dimensions of the mind inform one another and shape our daily lives in subtle and overt ways. Throughout history, consciousness has served as a fundamental element in spiritual practices, transcending the boundaries of science and psychology. Various traditions emphasize the significance of cultivating a profound and steadfast awareness, an intentional way of living that transcends the fragmented and chaotic aspects of modern existence. Viewed in this light, consciousness transcends simple cognition. It represents a moral and existential fortitude, the ability to engage with intention, to build relationships, and to act with clarity. Yet this aspiration confronts immense challenges in today's attention economy. Constant digital stimulation fractures the ability to maintain any notion of sustained awareness. Attention has become commodified, manipulated by algorithms, optimized for engagement, often violent and rage-fueled, not reflection. In this context, the ability to remain conscious, to think deeply, choose wisely, and act freely takes on ethical and even political significance. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, transformed our understanding of the mind by proposing that much of what drives our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors occurs beneath the surface of conscious awareness. His work delved deeply into these hidden layers of the psyche, not just to theorize, but to help people confront and heal the unseen forces shaping their inner lives. One of his most accessible insights, the Freudian slip, captures this idea vividly. When someone accidentally calls a new partner by an ex's name or confuses a student's name with that of a troublesome sibling, Freud saw more than a simple mistake. He saw the unconscious mind momentarily breaking through. These slips, often brushed off as trivial, reveal the subtle influence of hidden desires and associations, offering regular glimpses into the deeper, often unacknowledged dimensions of the self. Central to Freud's theory are two fundamental drives that shape nearly all human behavior. The first is the life drive, or libido, which involves our instincts to survive, seek pleasure, avoid pain, and connect with others. The second is the death drive, a more unsettling force oriented towards aggression, destruction, and a return to stillness or non-being. Freud proposed that these two opposing energies are constantly at play within us, often without our conscious knowledge, and that they influence many aspects of our personal relationships to the choices we make in daily life. Another cornerstone of Freudian thought is the idea of repression. This psychological mechanism helps protect us by pushing painful or threatening thoughts, desires, and memories out of the conscious realm. While repression shields us from discomfort and anxiety, it doesn't eliminate those buried elements. They continue to operate in the background, often surfacing in disguised forms like dreams, emotional outbursts, or persistent symptoms. In this way, the unconscious continues to shape our lives, even when we think we've moved on. Freud also introduced the powerful concept of transference. In therapy, this occurs when individuals unconsciously redirect feelings about significant figures from their past, often parents or caregivers, onto their therapist. Right? That's the same thing as divine transference, where one, is mad at God because they're mad at their father. A patient may find themselves reacting to the therapist with affection, hostility, or neediness that reflects earlier relationships, not the present one. These moments are rich with meaning, offering a rare window into unresolved emotional patterns. And transference doesn't only happen in therapy, it plays out in everyday life, shaping how we interact with friends, coworkers, and romantic partners. Without realizing it, we often recreate familiar emotional dynamics from our past in our present relationships. Perhaps one of Freud's most enduring insights is that the way people navigate and resolve inner conflicts plays a defining role in who we become. Whether we sublimate unacceptable impulses into creative or socially valued expressions, or adopt attitudes opposite to our hidden desires through reaction formation, we're constantly managing the tension between inner drives and outer expectations. These unconscious strategies, or defense mechanisms, you might say, form the underlying structure of our personalities. Freud's vision of the psyche reminds us that we are never just the sum of our conscious thoughts. We are also shaped by the unseen forces that stir beneath. While Freud focused primarily on the personal unconscious, repressed material unique to the individual's experience, his one-time protege, Carl Jung, expanded this notion to include what he termed the collective unconscious. This concept proposes that beneath our personal unconscious lies a deeper universal layer of shared psychological inheritance common to all humanity. The collective unconscious, as envisioned by Jung, is a deeply felt recognition that certain images, patterns, and experiences echo across the human condition, no matter where or when we live. As we've already explored with Jung, this layer of the unconscious holds what he called archetypes, primordial symbols and recurring motifs that show up in myths, dreams, religious stories, and works of art around the world. Jung wasn't only cataloging characters, he was pointing to something shared, universal templates embedded in the psyche that people around the world seem to inherit rather than learn. When we dream of a protective figure or see ourselves in the journey of a mythic hero, we're brushing up against these deeply rooted psychological structures. What makes Jung's vision fascinating is that his understanding of the unconscious reaches far beyond Freud's emphasis on personal repression and internal conflict. Jung saw the unconscious not as a dumping ground for shameful desires or forgotten memories, but as a vast reservoir of potential, a place teeming with symbols, wisdom, and unexpected guidance. It's as if each of us carries within a hidden map, charted not only by our personal history, but by the accumulated emotional and spiritual experiences of the human race. The unconscious, in this sense, becomes a source of creativity and inspiration, a bridge between our ordinary waking life and the mystery of something larger than ourselves. Whether we call it the soul, the divine, or simply the unknown depths of being. Jung's approach reshaped the purpose of psychological work. Rather than simply seeking to fix symptoms or resolve neurotic conflict, he proposed that the ultimate aim of psychological development is individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of the self, both conscious and unconscious. This journey is neither straightforward nor clean. Rather, it involves wrestling with contradiction and paradox. It means grappling with the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore, the shadow, the flaws, and fears we disown or project onto others. It means recognizing the ways we live out inherited patterns and unexamined scripts and slowly learning to rewrite them. Individuation asks us to stop running from contradiction and instead hold the tension between opposites, strength and vulnerability, control and surrender, light and darkness. In doing so, we don't erase our complexities. Instead, we become more fully ourselves. This vision of growth is not about perfection, but about authenticity, integration, and connection to ourselves, to others, and to the larger rhythms of the human story. Now, I'm talking about individuals, but let me say something about the Jews for a moment, right? Because we always talk about the Jews. Things are unraveling for the Jews really fast. If you've seen the recent reports on philanthropy, Jewish support of Jewish causes is rapidly declining. Jews are giving to non-Jewish causes increasingly. Synagogues and institutions are being held up by people over 70, right? Federations and JCCs where a friend asks a friend, so they give their money because their friend asks, and that's going to decline. And with the obsession with the conversation of anti-Semitism, not to say that it's a bad conversation or unworthy conversation, but essentially defense replacing, proactive engagement. Things are unraveling fast. And I think there's a lot of unconscious and shadow forces at play that are unresolved from Jewish history that are playing out in this moment of rapid assimilation, rapid disengagement, and anger, a lot of anger as it relates to allyship, as it relates to citizenship, and various forms of trauma. Lots more to talk about there, but we're not just talking about the human self here. I think if we look at the Jewish collective unconscious, we see a really big mess that the community's in right now, on a number of layers, and intergenerationally, folks not understanding each other very much. Moving from depth psychology to contemporary philosophy of mind, we encounter Daniel Dennett. At the core of Dennett's philosophical schema is the notion that consciousness and mental processes can be fully understood as physical phenomena, emergent properties of brain activity shaped by constantly emerging research into the mechanisms of natural selection. As he elegantly wrote, consciousness stands alone today as a topic that often leaves even the most sophisticated thinkers tongue-tied and confused, right? He's one of the guys who thinks everything is the brain. Of course, lots of academics have, critiqued that it's too narrow to think everything is brain. For his part, Dennett belongs to the compatibilist school of thought, which holds that free will and determinism can coexist. While accepting deterministic principles at the neurological level, he explores how we nevertheless experience choice and agency in meaningful ways. Indeed, in much of his work, Dennett weaves together insights from cognitive research, evolutionary frameworks, and philosophical traditions to illuminate how our conscious experience emerges as a sophisticated yet natural consequence of information processing systems, influenced by both biological imperatives and environmental interactions. His perspective challenges conventional wisdom by suggesting that consciousness isn't something mysterious or supernatural, but rather something that can be discerned through scientific investigation. So Dennett passed away just a few years ago. He was probably most famous for being one of the most vocal advocates for atheism. I forgot what they call them, the four horsemen or something like that, the four horsemen of atheism. So anyways, we spent some time on him, those who were in the philosophy class series. Now, what's particularly striking about Dennett's approach is the notion that our sense of self might be better understood not as some hidden internal observer, but rather as what he terms a narrative center of gravity, essentially a useful construct or organizing fiction that humans have evolved to generate. Like the center of gravity in physics, his narrative self serves practical purposes while not necessarily corresponding to any discrete entity. This conceptual framework allows people to navigate experiences and coordinate our behaviors, yet remains fundamentally a story we tell ourselves about who we are. Naturally, there are those who disagree with Dennett's assertions. To quote one, the implicit criticism is that Dennett's account of consciousness treats the self like a computer and reflects a disengagement from things like feeling and beauty. Let me say a thing about that, by the way. I think that one of the ethical critiques of AI is that, one of the many, let's just give one of the top dozen, is that people are going to be put out of work, right? What it's going to do economically to the workforce. Now, there's lots to say about that, but I think one of the things to say about that is if we can tap into the wisdom of every person rather than treat people as robots, then they can't be replaced. If we treat people like machines, then they're going to be replaced. If we can actually actualize the wisdom of individuals, everybody from top to bottom, and not just have top-down leadership, then everyone is irreplaceable, right? And that's the wisdom shift that can occur if we embrace an egalitarian approach to humanity. And so I think that's one of the mistakes of those who view humans as brains is that we will view them fundamentally as robots that can be replaced. Why would you want to have sexual relations with a person if they're just a robot, when you can have sexual relations with a robot? Right? If that person is nothing more than a computer, there's no intimacy, there's no relationship. It's just about physical pleasure, right? So too, in any relationship, like I know people who have a relationship they've cultivated with AI because it knows them better than a person knows them, right? And so once you feel you've met your needs with robots, then we fundamentally missed what it means to be human and be in human relationships, I think. But push back if you disagree. Anyways, Dennett's theoretical perspective is increasingly documented by findings in contemporary neuroscience. Studies show that neural activity linked to decision-making can often be detected seconds before individuals report a conscious intent to act, suggesting that certain choices may begin forming in the unconscious long before they reach awareness. These discoveries challenge traditional notions of volition, but also invite a more nuanced understanding of the mind, where consciousness is seen not as a single force directing behavior, but as a dynamic and distributed process interwoven with unconscious cognition. The essence of the mind-body relationship opens more questions about the nature and scope of consciousness itself. Is awareness uniquely human, or does it exist along a continuum across species? There's plentiful new studies that have shared empirical evidence that suggests the latter. Studies of animal cognition have revealed behaviors and neural architectures that mirror conscious capacities in humans, especially among mammals and birds. Self-recognition, emotional expression, and tool use offer behavioral indicators of a rich interior life in animals. The 2012 Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, endorsed by prominent neuroscientists, formally acknowledged that, quote, convergent evidence indicates that non-human animals have the anatomical, neurochemical, and neurophysiological substrates of conscious states, along with the capacity to exhibit intentional behaviors. The phenomenon of sleep provides another important window into the gradations of awareness. During non-REM sleep, consciousness fades into near oblivion. Yet during REM sleep, the brain produces vivid, often surreal dream experiences. These dreams represent an altered yet subjectively coherent state of consciousness, an arena where unconscious content surfaces in symbolic form. Neuroscientific studies of dreaming show that the brain's emotional and visual centers become highly active, even more so than during wakefulness, while areas responsible for rational thought and external awareness recede. This supports the idea that consciousness is neither binary nor fixed, but fluid and variable across internal and external states. The idea of divine consciousness stretches the limits of our imagination, and our moral imagination in particular. While theology teaches that God is infinitely aware, holding all beings, all needs, and all moments in loving attention at once, we human beings move through life in much narrower lanes. Our awareness is finite. Our focus on one thought, one feeling, one task at a time, right? The illusion of multitasking is nothing more than an illusion. We process reality in fragments, not in full. This gap between divine omniscience and human limitation can feel vast. How can we begin to grasp a God who doesn't just perceive all people as a group, but as individuals, each known intimately and wholly? Right? In fact, that's part of the High Holiday liturgy, is how God judges each person individually. Now, judgment is kind of unfashionable today. People say, oh, I'm not interested in a judgmental God, and I'm not going to push back against that. But the positive spin on a judgmental God is that God cares about every individual. God is interested in the moral choices of every individual. It pushes our mental and spiritual frameworks to their edge to even imagine someone, right? Some of us have trouble caring about 5 people in our life or 10 people in our life. How many people can we truly regularly take care of? Rather than leading us to despair, this contrast serves as a sacred invitation. No, we're never going to be all-knowing, but can we stretch the borders of our consciousness just a little further? Can we learn to love more fully, listen more deeply? Can we be present with greater compassion and clarity for others? This challenge is not abstract. It lives in the moral dilemmas we face every day. We are called to care for the closest to us and also to love the stranger. We're asked to tend to our immediate communities while holding in mind the suffering of those far away. These dual commitments are hard to balance, yet they are essential in a world as interconnected as ours. Across spiritual traditions, there are sacred tools to help expand our awareness. Mindful prayer, meditation, study, acts of loving kindness, and communal rituals that bind individual hearts to collective purpose. These practices don't erase our human limits, but they soften the edges of the self, helping us grow into people who can carry more care, more complexity, more connection. In this digital age, when our minds are pulled in 1,000 directions and our attention is bought and sold, we need this kind of transformation more than ever. Our awareness is under siege, but the vision of divine consciousness, of boundless relational awareness, offers more than comfort. It offers a calling. It asks us to resist fragmentation and to choose presence. It calls us to cultivate a consciousness spacious enough to hold both justice and mercy, both immediacy and eternity, both love for the one in front of us and care for the world beyond our reach. This ethical expansion of consciousness manifests in social and institutional life as well. Philosopher and organizational thinker Frederick Laloux has argued that just as individuals evolve in consciousness, so too do organizations and societies. In his book, Reinventing Organizations, Laloux identifies historical shifts in collective awareness, each reflected in the way institutions are structured. Early models emphasize control, hierarchy, and predictability. More recent developments favor purpose-driven, self-managed organizations that integrate emotional intelligence, authenticity, and shared vision. In Laloux's framework, the fundamental understanding is that human societies, like individuals, don't grow in linear fashion, but in stages of increasing maturity, consciousness, and complexity. By the way, what a tragedy in America today, because the notion of democracy is that the people are more complex than the leader. When something less complex tries to control something more complex, the system falters. When something more complex is given freedom, the system can evolve and grow. Think of the human body. If the hand controls the brain is severely limited. But the brain, which is much more complex than anything else in the body, controls the rest, right? If you have a dictator who tries to control the masses, the system fails, right? You need to give the freedom to the people, right? That's one of the virtues of capitalism as well. I mean, there's lots of, there's lots of pitfalls to, capitalism run amok. But the notion of freedom and of is really powerful. And so too in organizations. Organizations can evolve, once again, when there's a freedom for evolution. In any case, taken together, the differing and highly subjective approaches paint a portrait of consciousness as multifaceted, emergent, and charged with an ethical leaning. Far from being a fixed trait or isolated phenomenon, consciousness is something that the human being participates in, cultivates, and collectively shapes. To understand it is not merely to decode brain patterns or interpret dreams. It's to ask, how do we choose to live, attend, and to be present in a world that constantly pulls us away from ourselves and from one another? This perspective invites us to see organizations not merely as efficiency mechanisms, but as expressions of cultural consciousness. The structures within which we work shape our awareness, just as our evolving consciousness drives changes in how we organize collectively. This dynamic relationship between individual and organizational consciousness represents a frontier in understanding how awareness operates beyond the individual level. Jewish tradition offers a distinctive and deeply holistic lens on consciousness through the concept of dat, a form of knowledge that goes beyond mere data collection or intellectual analysis. Dat, or das, is not simply about what we know in the mind, but about how we integrate that knowledge into how we live, feel, and relate to others, right? I know I met people in yeshivas who are like computers. They are brilliant and have mastered the Talmud, right? And yet they lack so much wisdom sometimes. Some of them are very wise, and some of them lack basic wisdom because they have mistaken Jewish learning for just knowledge collection, right? Like seeing everything, knowing everything that's being said, which you can get from an encyclopedia or from Safari or from ChatGPT, as opposed to an integration, right? That's true in any field as well. The difference between deep understanding and simple knowledge collection. It weaves together moral intuition, spiritual sensitivity, and an understanding grounded in lived experience and meaningful connection. Unlike superficial forms of awareness that remain abstract or detached, dat is a type of knowing that unites head, heart, and hand, intellect, emotion, and action. By the way, a critique of some progressive activists also is that sometimes where there's a lack of wisdom is in a space where there's just a sense of quote unquote love of everyone or just boundless empathy, but actually no knowledge to actually understand the systems at play. Just kind of a screaming of love for everyone without understanding the complexity of the systems and various sides and perspectives of complex situations. So I think one side is hyper knowledge focused without the integration of empathy and the wholeness of self. And one side, it just claims love, right? And I don't even mean this as a political conversation. It just is a sense of some of the societal dynamics right now of some of the loudest voices, and what they point us to. It points us to a consciousness that is not only aware, but embodied, one that translates perception into moral responsibility. In this framework, true awareness is measured not just by clarity of thought, but by our capacity to act ethically and relate compassionately to those around us. In Jewish thought, prophecy is closely linked to altered states of consciousness. According to Maimonides, most prophets did not receive divine messages in full waking awareness, but rather in dreamlike or trance states, where ordinary cognition is subdued and the rational mind is quieted. In his work, Yesodei HaTorah, he explains that it's precisely in these suspended states of consciousness, when the distractions and defenses of the ego are softened, that the prophet becomes open to communication from a higher plane. Right? It says Mishnah Torah here because Yesodei HaTorah is one of the introductory sections of Mishnah Torah. Extraordinarily, Jewish tradition holds that Moshe alone received prophecy while fully awake and alert. In the Mor Nevuchim, Rambam emphasizes that Moses' prophetic experience was unique in its immediacy and clarity, unmediated by dream, symbols, and metaphor. As Rambam writes, there is, however, an opinion of our sages frequently expressed. The Israelites heard the first and the second commandments from God, right, of the 10. They learned the truth of the principles contained in these two commandments in the same manner as Moshe, and not through Moshe. For these two principles, the existence of God and his unity, can be arrived at by means of reasoning, and whatever can be established by proof is known by the prophet in the same way as by any other person. He has no advantage in this respect. It's further necessary to understand that some persons perceive scenes, dreams, and confused images when awake in the form of a prophetic vision. They then believe that they are prophets. They wonder that they perceive these visions and think they have acquired wisdom without training. They fall into grave errors as regards important philosophical principles and see a strange mixture of true and imaginary things. All this is the consequence of the strength of their imaginative faculty and the weak of their logical faculty, which has not developed. Here, he's largely critiquing the Greeks. Of course, he has a profound respect for the Greeks, but here he's dealing with the philosopher who's not a prophet. By the way, who is the prophet for Maimonides? It is the philosopher. I mean, the philosopher sage, right? Not just the secular philosopher, but the one who has actualized their mind on such a level, but embraces a certain humility of limitations. This distinction points to a deeper insight that spiritual truth often requires stepping outside the usual framework of conscious, ego-driven thought. Most prophets, like most people, need to move beyond the noise of the everyday mind to access higher understanding. Moshe, however, represents a rare synthesis, being fully conscious while receiving direct revelation. His example invites reflection on the varied layers of awareness through which insight, both psychological and spiritual, may arise. The association between prophecy and altered states of consciousness indicates that certain forms of wisdom, particularly those touching on the sacred or the transcendent, may require moving beyond the narrow confines of the conscious ego. In ordinary waking life, we are steeped in self-awareness, constantly evaluating, controlling, and narrating our experience. This I-centered mode of being can act as a barrier to deeper insight. The ego's ceaseless need for the control and coherence can drown out subtler signals from within and beyond. Thus, the suspension of egoic consciousness, or what the Jewish mystics call bittul hayesh, the nullification of self, which becomes not a loss, but a portal to expanded awareness and spiritual intimacy. This reframing of the unconscious, not as a problem to be overcome, but as a potential gateway aligned with the Kabbalistic and Hasidic traditions. According to these mystical teachings, releasing the ego allows one to encounter divine presence more directly. While moral development typically involves becoming more consciously aware of one's motives and ethical responsibilities, spiritual development may paradoxically require moments of self-forgetting, where boundaries dissolve and the individual merges, however briefly, with a larger, more unified field of meaning. A particularly illuminating example is found in the biblical narrative of Bilam and his talking donkey, Rambam interprets this seemingly fantastical episode not as a literal occurrence, but as a metaphorical vision within a prophetic dream state. Rather than dismissing the story as implausible, he invites us to read it symbolically as a narrative unfolding in an altered state of consciousness, where the boundaries of ordinary perception are lifted. Such stories, he argues, convey spiritual truths that can only be grasped when the mind is freed from the rigid demands of logic and literalism. It becomes clear then that consciousness is not a fixed or singular phenomenon, but a dynamic, evolving dimension of the human experience. From a developmental perspective, it unfolds dramatically over the course of a lifetime. A newborn lacks self-awareness or the ability to perceive others as separate beings. The infant's world is one of immediacy and immersion, where boundaries between self and environment are blurred. There's no reflective distance or only raw experience. And as children grow, they gradually develop awareness of themselves as distinct individuals. They begin to recognize that others have separate perspectives and intentions, and they come to understand object permanence, the realization that things continue to exist even when not in view. These milestones mark profound shifts in consciousness, laying the foundation for empathy, reasoning, and identity. This progression continues into adolescence and adulthood, where new layers of complexity emerge. Adult consciousness also undergoes meaningful evolution. At more advanced levels, consciousness expands to include systems thinking, the ability to perceive patterns, relationships, and cascading effects across time and space. It's not merely about knowing facts or mastering tasks, but developing the capacity to hold multiple perspectives and reflect on one's place within a complex world. This deeper mode of awareness is sometimes referred to as metacognition, the ability to observe one's own thought processes, emotional patterns, and inner narratives. Many people operate on autopilot, reacting to life based on ingrained conditioning, trauma histories, or cultural assumptions they've never examined. Developing mature consciousness involves cultivating the humility and curiosity to ask difficult questions. Why do I believe what I believe? What unconscious patterns drive my behavior? Where did these scripts originate? And do they still serve me? These are great questions for the month of Elul, by the way. This self-reflective capacity marks a unique and powerful feature of human consciousness. The ability to turn awareness inward and make the unconscious conscious. Through practices like meditation, therapy, spiritual study, journaling, and philosophical inquiry, we can learn to illuminate the unseen forces shaping our lives. In doing so, we don't just gain knowledge, we deepen our presence, expand our empathy, and open ourselves to truths that lie beyond the surface of thought. Okay, dear friends, I would love to hear from you. That is a lot to say about consciousness and unconsciousness, and I hope you'll share some things you're thinking about. Okay, Janie, I see you've just entered the screen. Let's start with you.
Well, I think the whole discussion that you initiated this morning really goes back to our questions of AI. What's the difference between a human and a robot? And I think it comes down to a lot of what you said. Now, I think as humans, we think, oh, we're always going to be better than robots. So I think maybe a lot of religion is our way of saying, hey, we're better than, just robots. I want to go back to the animals, though, and I think you referenced that, whether you intended to or not, that a lot of what we claim as humans are reflected in animals. They care for each other. They mourn when there is a death. They feel things. For thousands of years, I think the majority of humans disregarded that. And even today, with the slaughter of animals and so forth, that we like to think we're above, or that we can use them for our own purposes. I'm getting beyond that. Anyway, you said, you used the word ideation in the beginning, and I'm really falling back on that because I think that's the difference between AI and humans, that it's not just taking information and coming up with a different idea. In AI, they have the information and they come up with a different idea. They go through ideation, but it's based on the information they've been provided. Whereas humans go through ideation, and we not only have the information, but we have the, what did you call it, moral intuition, the spiritual understanding that's not possible with AI. And therefore, we are able to go through the process of ideation and come up with not new ideas based on the information we've been provided, but ideation that involves moral intuition and spiritual understanding.
Thank you, Janie. I'm just checking because I'm glad you added the idea of ideation, because actually I did not use that word. The formation of ideas and concepts. The word I used was individuation, which is something different. It's the process of a person or organism becoming a distinct, separate, and whole individual. But your point about ideation is well taken and appreciated. In addition to that, and so I appreciate that and your point about animals. So thank you. And I think this is a crucial conversation to continue having. Oh yes, hi Cheryl, hop in.
Hello. Oh, okay. I'm in the car, so I didn't know if I could speak.
Yeah, great.
Anyway, I kept thinking of people sometimes and their books written about it. The bad seed. Somebody is a bad seed. Now, so what does that mean? Especially when you just reference at the end how infants don't have any kind of they can't distinguish people and things like that. So is it because how does someone is someone born a bad seed? Is there is something awry in their conscious, well, obviously in their conscious decisions, because a person becomes known as a bad seed after committing any kind of crimes or any kind of bad behavior, consistent bad behavior, that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering how that kind of thing happens. Is it the unconscious becoming conscious and a decision is made, or the unconscious overriding the conscience and the decision is made? That's my question.
Great. I love that. I'm going to leave that open to the group. I certainly can circle back if others don't want to engage with it or aren't, but I think that's a really great question, and it's something we're really grappling with today in many different ways. So let me keep the question alive. Yes, Mara.
I would say, I mean, it's trauma in some form, right? Which can be so many different things. Trauma can be something that you remember. It could be a series of really minor attitudes that shape you over time. It could be a single horrific event. It can be something that happens in utero that you're not even aware of, but that you experience as a fetus, right? Like trauma can be so many things that compound and turn into mental health issues that make someone be a bad seed, right? Like there's something there, in my opinion, right?
Yeah, that's well said. If anyone else wants to build on that, what Mara's adding here around trauma in the broadest sense and the kind of the mark that leaves within, if not addressed.
What the entire discussion today raised in my mind is when you think of a world that has, I don't know, 4 billion people in it, the variety of ways in which people's experiences, whether they're traumatic or learned or simply experienced, is enormous. That trying to universalize anything is a fool's errand. That we have just enormous differences between each other, and the way our unconscious or subconscious or preconscious affects our conscious states varies for each of us, and how we come to make our conscious decisions at the end of the day just has enormous variety. It's very difficult, I think, for scientists who are scientists of the mind in one way or the other, whether they're neurobiologists or psychologists or whichever part of mind study they are in, is extraordinarily difficult. I mean, having been trained as an economist, which is way simpler in my mind, because it's only dealing with one small part of the human experience, and yet the complexity of that is way too great for anybody to truly understand what's happening, to understand what's actually happening in the interaction between the unconscious and conscious minds when there's such variety between peoples, and then to try and make up rules for it, like the rules you talked about of the various scientists who began this study, is just, I think it again goes beyond our conscious ability to make up rules. And so we try to do things that simplify, so that we have some ability to understand things, but we never really can understand the true complexity of what's happening across all peoples. The best we can do is come up with some patterns that we can recognize. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because that like is one of the meta themes of this whole series, actually. That in a sense, the study of psychology, similar to the study of theology, is almost foolish from the start, because we want to oversimplify and put things in boxes as if we could know God, as if we could understand people. And so we say silly things like, oh, people think like this, or people do that, and try to oversimplify to pretend like we understand people. Or we read a book about child development, or we read a book about relationships, and we think we understand why people do what they do, right? And we have no clue. Or behavioral economics, perhaps the most guilty. Behavioral economics, where people can profit off of human predictability, right? And off of human norms. And I think even the people we know the best, we really don't know at all, right? In terms of how they are thinking and operating. We just make certain assumptions. And as has been said, the greatest wisdom of all is to know oneself. How many of us truly even know ourselves? So forget even the psyche of the other, the psyche of self. And so I really appreciate that point. And I think part of what this session does for me in thinking about this over recent weeks is just the profound awe of the mind and spirit of humanity and of the self, and the unconscious realm that we can't even begin to grasp how deep it is. Like the image of the iceberg, how much is below we can't even see.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, I guess partly I was reacting to what Mara said about it being traumatic experiences that turn people into a bad seed, because I notice some people who are in our government who I don't believe have made the choices they make because of traumatic experiences. I believe these are learned things that they have learned to hate certain groups of people, or have learned to use the hate that others have for certain groups of people in order to gain power for themselves and to effectuate power, and that they are not evil because they've been traumatized in some way. They're evil because they learned to be evil. So
thank you, Mara. Do you want to respond to that?
I mean, I agree with you for sure. I was not thinking about those kinds of people, right? And I think that it's almost like, again, not trying to explain or diagnose the situation, but certainly there's a power dynamic at play there, right? Like they've participated in a cycle that increased their power and their ego, that they should continue to increase their power, right? Like there's something going on there, which I would argue as a feminist ultimately is trauma, right? For them to be stuck in that box where they think that they need to do X, Y, Z to feel good inside, right? When, maybe releasing some of that power might be what is ultimately satisfying. But yeah, I also agree with you, Ken.
I mean, I do think since we moved into the political realm that, and we've discussed this before in our shadow session, but this country fundamentally needs to embrace on a spiritual journey of looking at the shadow side of our society. And that is a really hard thing to do, especially if people feel like they are being yelled at or screamed at or are pushed back on their heels. So I don't know how we both fight injustice with all forces we can, while also inviting the same folks that we are challenging on the most intense way to embrace upon this collective spiritual process. And I wonder how other people think about this. Because we will not get out of this pain until we have brought some of those unconscious forces to surface. And I agree that some of these are maliciously intent, fully aware and conscious what's being chosen. And I also think that some of those same people are so deep in it that they can't pull themselves out anymore. They're not free to remove themselves from where they have positioned themselves at this moment. Cheryl? Hi.
Okay, this is Stan. Go ahead.
Hi,
Great.
Shmuly.
Hi, Stan.
Shmuly, I kind of disagree with you that people are so entrenched that they can't get out. Yom Kippur teaches us that we can change, and you can always change. You can stop your bad behavior. You can correct it. So that's just my read on that.
Yeah. So the way I view that, I'm not a big faith person, but one of the ways I understand faith is things I want to believe in that I don't naturally believe in. That's kind of one of my 5 forms of faith. And so because of the Yom Kippur message, I want to believe that everyone can choose their way out. Because I think you're right. That is authentic to Jewish thought and the Yom Kippur narrative. And yet, I just don't have the data to back up that sense that people who are immensely stuck are capable of doing that, certainly not on their own. Even the number of people I know who go to Yom Kippur every year and leave relatively or almost entirely untransformed is very high, often including myself. I mean, I'd like to think I've been softened in some way, have been reflective in some morally generative way, but I don't have the data. I haven't hired the consultant to measure, take the metrics of success to see if the behavioral changes are significant. But yes, I would like to have faith in the idea that all humans can do that. Maybe, it's even been said that the challenge after the Holocaust was not to have faith in God, but to have faith in man. Can we revive a faith in humanity, in the fundamental goodness and capacity for change? I don't know the answer to that. We might have to stop reading the news if we're going to embark upon that. All right, friends. I wish you a beautiful day. Chodesh Tov, a great month of Elul. This is the month where we should be thinking exactly about what Stan is asking us to think about. The potential for change and the belief in the potential for change in us and in others. Because if we don't believe in that, why should we do anything but eat, drink, and be merry? Just go buy our next Ticketmaster concert. Just buy the next one, because there's nothing more than entertainment in this world, right? There's nothing worth fighting for or working towards. I don't believe in that. And I know you're all here every week because I know you don't believe in that either. So let's continue to roll up our sleeves and open our minds and think about how we can do things that transform spirits and minds. Have a beautiful day. Much love.